This episode was produced using AI-generated voices and scripting. All right, so today we're diving into the future of electric vehicles. And Matt, I feel like this is one of those topics where the landscape shifts every 6 months. Where do you even want to start?
Yeah, it really does. I think the place to start is actually where we are right now because I think people have a skewed sense of it. Like, depending on who you listen to, EVs are either about to take over the world next Tuesday or they're a dying fad. And the truth is way more boring and interesting at the same time,
Boring and interesting. I like that.
right? So globally, EV sales are still growing. They're growing a lot, actually. But the rate of growth has slowed compared to like 2021, 2022, when it was just this exponential rocket ship. And that slowdown has caused a lot of people to panic and say, oh, EVs are dead. But that's not what's happening at all.
It's more like they went from hypergrowth to just regular strong growth?
Exactly. And that's normal. That's what happens with any technology adoption curve. You get the early adopters, there's this huge rush, and then you hit the early majority. And things slow down a bit because those buyers are pickier. They want more charging infrastructure. They want lower prices. They want variety. They're not buying an EV because it's cool and new. They're buying it because it has to make sense for their life.
So what's the actual number right now? Like, what share of new car sales are electric?
It depends hugely on where you are. In China, it's something like 45 to 50% of new car sales if you include plug-in hybrids. Norway's been above 90% for a while. In the US, we're hovering around 8 to 10% depending on the quarter. Europe's somewhere in the mid-teens to low 20s. So it's all over the map.
Wait, China is at almost 50%? That's wild.
It's staggering. And it happened incredibly fast. Part of it is government policy, massive subsidies over the years. But honestly, at this point, the Chinese EV market is self-sustaining. BYD is now the largest automaker in the world by some metrics. They're making EVs that cost $15,000, $16,000, and they're genuinely good cars.
Which brings up the whole geopolitical angle, right? Like the tariff situation.
Oh, totally. So the US has put 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs. Europe's imposed tariffs too, though smaller. And the argument is that Chinese manufacturers are benefiting from unfair subsidies and they'd flood the market and destroy domestic automakers. And there's some truth to that. But there's also a real cost to consumers. You're essentially saying we're going to keep cheap, efficient electric cars out of your hands to protect our industry.
And is that a reasonable trade-off? Like, I can see both sides, but protecting an industry that's slower to innovate feels, I don't know.
It's complicated. Because on one hand, you want to have domestic manufacturing capacity. That's a national security thing. It's a jobs thing. On the other hand, if the goal is to decarbonise transportation as fast as possible, keeping affordable EVs out of the market is directly working against that. So you've got these two policy goals that are genuinely in tension with each other.
Right, right. And meanwhile, what are the American and European automakers actually doing? Because it feels like some of them are going all in and others are kind of hedging.
It's a mess, honestly. So you've got companies like GM who announced this huge EV push, then pulled back, then pushed forward again. Ford has been losing billions on their EV division. They're basically subsidizing it with truck and SUV profits. And then you've got companies like Toyota who are very publicly skeptical of full battery electric and were pushing hydrogen and hybrids instead.
And Toyota's been getting a lot of heat for that.
They have. But here's the thing. And this might be a slightly unpopular take. I actually think Toyota wasn't entirely wrong. Not about hydrogen, that's still a niche play at best. But about hybrids being part of the bridge. If you look at what's selling really well right now, it's plug-in hybrids and regular hybrids. They're having a renaissance. And Toyota was making that argument years ago when everyone was laughing at them.
Interesting. So you think the all-or-nothing BEV approach was maybe too aggressive?
For some markets, yeah. Like if you live in an apartment without a garage, or you're in a rural area where the nearest fast charger is 80 miles away. A plug-in hybrid that gives you 40 to 60 miles of electric range and then switches to gas. That's a really compelling product. It gets you most of the environmental benefit without the range anxiety.
But doesn't that just delay the inevitable? Like, at some point we need to go fully electric, right?
Probably. But the question is how you get there. And I think the mistake a lot of people make is treating this like a binary. Like you're either pro-EV or anti-EV. when really it's about what pathway gets the most carbon out of the atmosphere the fastest. And sometimes the answer is a hybrid in someone's driveway today, rather than a full EV they can't afford or can't charge for another 5 years.
That's fair. Let's talk about charging, though, because that feels like the big bottleneck everyone keeps pointing to.
It is, and it isn't. So the charging situation has gotten a lot better. Tesla's supercharger network is genuinely excellent. And now with the NACS connector becoming the standard in North America, basically everyone's adopting Tesla's plug. There's going to be a lot more interoperability. That's a huge deal.
Yeah, the plug standardization thing is underrated. Like, imagine if every gas station had a different nozzle.
Right, that's literally what it was like. You had CCS, CHA demo, Tesla's proprietary plug, and it was a nightmare for consumers. The fact that the industry basically said, okay, Tesla, you win, your plug is better, we're all adopting it, that's a massive step forward.
So if the plug situation is getting sorted out, what's still broken about charging?
Reliability is the big one. Like, if you're not on Tesla's network, the experience at a lot of public chargers is still really bad. You pull up, the charger's broken, or it won't authenticate. Or it charges at a fraction of the advertised speed. There was a study, I think it was from 2023, that found something like 20 to 25% of non-Tesla public chargers in California were non-functional at any given time.
That's terrible.
It's awful. And that's California, which is supposed to be the most EV-friendly state. Now it's getting better. The federal NEVI program is pouring billions into building out a national network with strict uptime requirements. But we're still in the early innings of making public charging as reliable and seamless as pulling into a gas station.
And what about speed? Because I keep hearing about these ultra-fast chargers that can do like 10 to 80% in 15 minutes. Is that real?
It's real for some cars under some conditions. Like the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and 6 have 800-volt architecture that can charge incredibly fast. Some of the newer Porsches, the Kia EV6. But, and this is a big but, those speeds depend on the car, the charger, the temperature, the state of charge. You're not going to get peak speed on a freezing January morning when the battery's cold. The car will throttle the charge rate to protect the battery.
Oh, totally. I've heard cold weather is a real issue for EVs generally.
It is. And it's one of those things the industry doesn't love talking about. In very cold weather, you can lose 20 to 40% of your range. The battery chemistry just doesn't perform as well. Plus, you're running the heater, which draws a lot of power. Heat pumps have helped. Most newer EVs use heat pumps instead of resistive heaters. But it's still a real thing. If you live in Minnesota, that 300-mile range might be 200 in January.
So let's talk about the batteries themselves. What's the next big leap there?
Okay, so this is where it gets really exciting. The current generation is mostly lithium-ion, specifically NMC, nickel, manganese, cobalt, and LFP, which is lithium iron phosphate. LFP is cheaper, safer, lasts longer, but has lower energy density. That's what's in a lot of the cheaper EVs and what Tesla uses in their standard range models now.
And what comes after that?
The big one everyone's watching is solid-state batteries. Instead of a liquid electrolyte, you've got a solid one. The promise is way higher energy density, like 50 to 100% more. Faster charging, better safety because there's no flammable liquid, and potentially longer lifespan. Toyota, Samsung SDI, QuantumScape. A bunch of companies are working on this.
But solid state has been 5 years away for like 20 years, right?
Yeah, it's the fusion energy of batteries. And I'll be honest, I'm cautiously optimistic, but still skeptical about mass production timelines. Toyota says they'll have solid state in production vehicles by 2027 or 2028. I'd bet on 2030 at the earliest, for anything at scale. The manufacturing challenges are enormous. Making these things in a lab is one thing. Making them by the millions reliably and cheaply is a completely different problem.
What about sodium ion? I've been hearing about that a lot lately.
Oh, sodium ion is fascinating. So sodium is incredibly abundant. It's literally in salt, which means it's cheap and there's no supply chain concern the way there is with lithium or cobalt. CATL, which is the world's biggest battery maker, has already started producing sodium ion cells. The trade-off is lower energy density than lithium ion, so you're not going to see it in a long-range Tesla. But for city cars, short-range vehicles, scooters, energy storage, it could be a game changer.
And it sidesteps all the ethical issues with cobalt mining and lithium extraction?
Mostly, yeah. I mean, you still need to mine other materials. And any large-scale mining has environmental impact. But cobalt specifically has been a really dark part of the EV supply chain. A significant amount comes from the DRC under horrific labour conditions. So moving away from cobalt, which LFP already does and sodium ion would do, is genuinely important.
Let's zoom out a bit. Do you think every car on the road will eventually be electric? Like, is the internal combustion engine truly dead?
In wealthy countries, for passenger vehicles, I think the answer is effectively yes, over a long enough timeline. But long enough might be 30 or 40 years, not 10. There are still going to be ICE cars on the road in 2050. The average car in the US is like 12 years old. Even if we stopped selling gas cars tomorrow, it'd take over a decade to turn over the fleet.
And there are some use cases where electric just doesn't work yet, right? Like long-haul trucking?
Yeah, that's a harder nut to crack. Batteries are heavy, and in trucking, every pound of battery is a pound of cargo you can't carry. There's some really interesting work being done though. Tesla's Semi exists, Daimler has their e-Cascadia, and the real-world range is getting usable for regional haul, say 200 to 300 miles. But for a truck going 600 miles across the Great Plains, that's where hydrogen fuel cells, or maybe e-fuels, might have a role.
Interesting. So hydrogen isn't dead, it's just niche?
That's how I'd put it. For passenger cars, I think hydrogen is basically done. The infrastructure costs are insane. The efficiency is terrible compared to battery electric. You lose like 2/3 of the energy in the conversion process. But for heavy transport, shipping, maybe aviation, there could be a real case, especially green hydrogen made from renewable electricity.
Okay, let me push on something. The grid. Everyone always brings up the grid when we talk about EVs. Like, can the grid even handle it if everyone goes electric?
So this is one of my pet peeves because the way it's usually framed is totally misleading. People imagine everyone plugging in at the same time and the grid just exploding. That's not how it works. Most EV charging happens at home overnight when the grid has tons of spare capacity. Utilities actually want more nighttime load because their power plants are running anyway and they're basically wasting that capacity.
Wait, really? So EVs could actually help the grid?
They can. And this is where it gets really cool. There's this concept called V2G, vehicle to grid. The idea is your car battery doesn't just consume electricity, it can feed it back. So during peak demand in the afternoon, your car sitting in the driveway could actually be selling electricity back to the grid. Your car becomes a distributed battery network. Ford's already doing a basic version of this with the F-150 Lightning, where you can power your house during an outage.
That's wild. So the same car that people say is going to break the grid could actually stabilize it.
In theory, yes. Now, the practical challenges are real. You need smart charging infrastructure. You need utility rate structures that incentivize it. You need the car and the grid to be able to communicate. We're nowhere near full V2G deployment. But the pieces are falling into place, and I think in 10 years this is going to be a really significant part of how we manage the grid.
Let me throw you a curveball. Autonomous driving and EVs. They seem linked, but are they actually?
They're linked in practice, but not in principle. Like, there's no technical reason an autonomous car has to be electric. But every company building autonomous vehicles is building them on electric platforms. Waymo uses Jaguar I-Paces and now Zeekr EVs. Cruise was using the Chevy Bolt. Tesla's whole thing is that autonomy and EVs are part of the same package.
Why, though? Just because the companies are the same, or is there an actual advantage?
There are real advantages. Electric drivetrains are simpler and more predictable, which makes them easier to control with software. The response time on an electric motor is milliseconds, versus a gas engine with a transmission. Plus, if you're running a robotaxi fleet, the fuel costs are way lower with electricity, and maintenance is almost nothing. No oil changes, no transmission fluid. Brake pads last forever because of regenerative braking.
The robotaxi thing is interesting. Do you buy the vision that personal car ownership is going to decline because of autonomous ride-hailing?
Okay, here's where I'll actually take a strong stance. I think the timeline people are projecting for that is wildly optimistic. Not because the technology won't get there, It will eventually, but because people fundamentally underestimate how much Americans love owning their cars. A car isn't just transportation, it's storage, it's privacy, it's identity, it's freedom. The idea that people are going to give that up because a robotaxi is 20% cheaper per mile, I just don't see it happening at scale in the next 20 years. Maybe in dense urban cores, but not in the suburbs, not in rural America.
I actually think I agree with you there. I've heard the argument that it'll be like how people stopped owning horses, but
But nobody loved their horse the way people love their pickup truck. It's a different emotional relationship entirely.
that's a good point. Okay, let's talk about something that doesn't get enough attention, the used EV market. Because affordability is a huge barrier, and new EVs are expensive.
This is a really important topic. So for years, the used EV market was basically non-existent because there weren't enough EVs out there. Now it's starting to develop, and some of the deals are incredible. You can get a used Chevy Bolt for like $15,000, $16,000. A used Tesla Model 3 for mid-20s. Those are real prices that real people can afford.
But there's the battery degradation worry, right? People are scared the battery's going to die, and they'll have a brick.
Yeah, and it's mostly overblown. The data we have from high-mileage Teslas and other EVs shows that most modern EV batteries retain 85 to 90% of their capacity after 200,000 miles. That's way better than people expected. The early Nissan Leafs with air-cooled batteries, those degraded badly. But modern thermally managed battery packs are lasting really well.
So the fear is based on early models that don't represent where the tech is now.
Exactly. But perception matters. And there's a legitimate concern about what happens when a battery does need replacing. Right now, a battery replacement can cost $10,000 to $15,000, which is potentially more than the car is worth if it's old enough. That's a real structural problem for the used market long term. We need a robust battery refurbishment and recycling industry. And it's developing, but it's not there yet.
What about the recycling angle? Because I've heard people say that EV batteries are going to create this massive waste problem.
So this is another area where I think the criticism is ahead of the facts, but the concern is legitimate. Right now, we're not recycling enough EV batteries because there aren't enough old batteries to recycle yet. Most EV batteries are still in their first life. But the recycling technology exists and it's improving fast. Companies like Redwood Materials, Li-Cycle, they're building facilities that can recover over 95% of the critical minerals from spent batteries.
Oh wow, 95%?
Yeah, and that's the goal, a closed loop. You take the lithium, cobalt, nickel from old batteries and put them into new ones. It dramatically reduces the need for new mining. And before the battery is recycled, it can have a second life as stationary storage. A battery that's degraded to 70% capacity might not be great in a car, but it's perfectly fine for storing solar energy at a warehouse. So the actual waste timeline is way longer than people think.
That's actually really reassuring. I feel like that story doesn't get told enough.
It doesn't, because nuance doesn't get clicks.
True. All right, so big picture, where are we in 5 years? Give me your best realistic prediction.
Okay? In 5 years, I think EVs are somewhere around 25 to 35% of new car sales in the US, higher in Europe, and way higher in China. Charging infrastructure is significantly better. Not perfect, but the NACS standard is everywhere, and uptime is closer to 95%. We'll have a couple of genuinely affordable EVs. Think $25,000 range. From both Chinese brands that may have found workarounds to tariffs and from domestic players. Battery costs continue to fall, maybe getting close to $60 per kilowatt hour at the pack level.
And the internal combustion engine?
Still very much alive, still the majority of cars on the road, but the trajectory is clear. It's like asking about flip phones in 2010. They were still everywhere, but you could see where things were heading.
I like that analogy. Although my uncle still had a flip phone until like 2019.
And there will absolutely be people driving gas cars in 2045. That's fine. We don't need a 100% adoption for EVs to have a massive impact on emissions. Getting to even 50% of the fleet being electric would be transformational.
Last question. If someone's listening to this and they're on the fence about buying an EV right now, what would you tell them?
I'd say it depends entirely on your situation. If you have a home where you can install a level 2 charger, if you're not regularly driving 400 miles in a day, and if there's a model in your budget that you actually like, do it. It's a genuinely better driving experience in a lot of ways. The instant torque, the quiet, the low maintenance. But if you're in an apartment with no charging access, or you tow a boat to the lake every weekend, maybe a plug-in hybrid is the smarter play right now. There's no shame in that.
Practical advice, I love it.
Yeah, I mean, the worst thing for the EV movement is someone buying an EV that doesn't work for their life, and then telling everyone they know that EVs suck. Getting the right car to the right person matters more than getting everyone into an EV tomorrow.
That's a great note to end on. Matt, this was awesome. Thanks for breaking it all down.
Always fun. Let's do it again soon.
We'll be back next week, everybody. Thanks for listening.